Welcome to the BitGeek podcast. I'm your host, Ron Avis, and with me on the couch to my left is my co-host as always,
Nick Wright.
And today we're going to talk about our 10 favorite Sega Saturn games. Okay, Nick, here we are. We're doing one of our 10 favorite game lists. It's one of our other go-to formats, but I like them because we can talk about games that we like the most. And some systems, it's hard to narrow down your favorite 5. And then other systems...
Because there's so many
because there's
to
so
choose
many.
from.
Yeah, true.
And then other times, it's like, there's not all that terribly much to choose from.
Yeah. Well, maybe not so much in your case for the Sega Saturn, but certainly in my case, I had a bit of a difficult time coming up with 5. But, you know, we were talking about which list we were going to do next. I recommended we do the Dreamcast, because I have fond memories of the Dreamcast. And you were like, well, wait a second.
Maybe we should do the Saturn first, and then come to Dreamcast. Even though I fully agree, Dreamcast is the better choice.
Yeah.
Totally agree. But
yeah, now let's not just come to the Saturn because it's all that's left. Let's just go ahead and do the Sega Saturn. It has an interesting history to talk about, and there were, as it turns out, some pretty good games if you knew where to find them.
And, you know, like you kind of alluded to a little bit, while I do have this chunk of games that, it's kind of hard to narrow down the top 5, at the same time... Well, we'll get to that, I think.
Yeah.
But my choice was difficult. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And we'll get to that.
True, so. That's true. Okay, so I thought maybe we'd just talk about the Saturn a little bit up front. It was, of course, the successor of the Sega Genesis / Sega CD. It had a bit of a rocky start, would you say?
A very rocky start. They jumped the gun.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think it was a wise decision.
Yeah. Well,
it would be very interesting to see it play out if PlayStation would have just come out first and then the Saturn come out later and see like how that would have played out. I don't know, but I don't really know that it helped them at all jumping the gun and releasing it early because the PlayStation was coming out.
I don't think there's any doubt that it hurt them coming out first, the way it did. I can understand wanting to be the first to market for something.
Yeah.
That
but
on paper sounds like they weren't ready. Of course, we're talking about the Saturn. It came out in May of 1995.
But
to
it
a lot of
wasn't
people's
scheduled
surprise.
to come out until fall.
No, right. It was supposed to come out in September. They had a day release for it, Saturn Day. Tom Kalinske, I forget the name of the guy exactly, but he was like the CEO for Sega of America. He was real big in making a spectacle of things, making events. He came out with Sonic, Sonic Tuesday. Mm-hmm. That was his big deal. And he had Saturn Day. It was going to come out on like a Saturday, I guess it was, in September. But they took a big time U-turn. I don't know what you want to call it. But during E3, I guess it was, that people were like, well, the Saturn was, a very impressive piece of hardware. It came out in Japan and was kind of a big hit.
So I guess this would have been like E3 of like 94, I guess?
Oh, you know what? Yeah.
95,
You're right. E3 94. Well, the Saturn came out and they announced first the price of $399. That's what it was going to cost. And then Sony came out after them and literally the Sony spokesperson walked up to the podium, said $299 and walked off. I mean, he dropped the mic, boom, that's all he said, and everybody went nuts. So right off the bat, the PlayStation was a $100 cheaper system than the Saturn right off the bat.
But E3, what is E3, like June?
June, yeah.
So was this at E3? Because basically you've got like an entire year at that point until the release. Because the way I recall it The release came out of
Was
nowhere.
was it a consumer electronics show? Maybe
It had to have been something else. It came out of nowhere. All of a sudden, the Saturn's out,
yeah.
and we weren't expecting it until fall, and it's out.
Yeah, I might be misremembering some things as far as how they happened in the timeline, but I do know that Saturn had the price out first, and then PlayStation like pretty much
'cause
stole their thunder by releasing.
They already had plans,
Yeah,
and then all of a sudden, PlayStation revealed their plans, and they thought, "Oh crap, we need to get
ahead of them.
Yeah,
Right. So yeah, so they came out in May of '95. That much we know. It came out first in Japan and actually did okay. You know, it sold decent. Um, but they rushed the Saturn release. They only had 30,000 units to ship initially, and they were only able to get it to a few department stores like Walmart and Target. They did not get any. It was Toys R Us, Babbage's, Software, etc., and like Electronic Boutique. That was it.
I remember when it showed up at Babbage's, it was like, am I dreaming?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not supposed to be out now.
Yeah, it wasn't like nowadays, and we harp on this a lot, but there was no Twitter or Kotaku or anything where like the rumors could start spinning. You know, sometimes you get a few days or weeks for rumors to start flying, and then stuff happens. But it appeared.
Like, and I don't remember if it was like you told me or you know what, I don't know, but it was just like I heard somewhere that Saturn is out now. It's at Babbage's, and I'm like, no, it's not. It doesn't come out until fall.
Yeah.
It came out early. What? You know, it's just that's the way I remember it.
It was really exciting. I remember being really excited about it, and I had some money from graduation, and I sunk my money into a Saturn because. And this is another thing too. Like I was trying to like recall like what the launch lineup was, and it was very slim pickings for sure. But it for sure came with Virtual Fighter, and I think it came with Sega World Soccer, and possibly the Clockwork Knight.
And see, because I got it later on, and I don't even remember getting any pack-in game.
Yeah.
But I don't know. Maybe that's just my fuzzy memory. I don't know.
I'm pretty sure I got a game with it, so it might have been Daytona USA. But, you know, there really weren't many games for it. And that's because it was early.
I think Night Warriors had just fairly recently come out when I got mine, because I bought mine with Night Warriors.
Yeah.
I bought them both at the same time.
And that didn't come out until the following year, I don't think.
Yeah.
96. So, you know, it was like kind of a Nintendo 64 situation where there weren't many launch games. But at least Nintendo 64 had Mario 64.
And Mario 64 can keep you happy for a while.
Yeah, similar to Switch, you know, it came out with Zelda. And, you know, now the Switch has a really impressive lineup of games. But for a little while, it was mostly just Zelda.
Yeah.
But it kept you busy. I mean, there were several hours.
But even if you didn't want to play Zelda, it had those downloadable titles, like the little indie games. Like Shovel Knight was out like right away.
Right away,
And
yeah.
I mean, there were like the Neo Geo games. Like there was a Metal Slug and a King of Fighters, I think.
You had some stuff to choose
So
from.
yeah, I mean, it wasn't much, but there was a little bit.
Right, but you know there were no downloadable titles for the Saturn, so there was there was no way for it to gain momentum as far as games library went. A few sparse releases here and there, and it wasn't until after the Saturn was released when I started working at Babbage's. So I remember, working there, and if I know you remember, but I don't know if you guys watching the show remember, Babbage's would have like a wall, and then there'd be like another wall that went this way, and then another wall, and then a wall, and it kind of like went diagonal pattern, kind of like along the walls. And up front was like your PlayStation and your Nintendo 64. And they both at least had 2 shelves full. And then sometimes even 3. Saturn didn't start showing up in its games until like the 5th or 6th shelf down. And it was one side. Like one side was Saturn games, and then like the other side was like the start of PC games.
Yeah.
Like, it was really pathetic. And I had a Saturn, so like I was always like hoping that good games would come out for it. And I had my gaming magazines, and they would have games that were coming. I knew stuff was coming out for it, but it just wasn't enough. And by the time the games were coming out for it, PlayStation was whooping up on Saturn big time. And I've got some numbers as far as sales go. Like the Sega Saturn in Japan and the US sold a grand total of 9,260,000 units.
Yeah.
That's it. And keep in mind, it went for several years in Japan after they gave up on it in the US. So that just tells you how slow of a, how weak it was in sales. And it was only a couple of years in the U.S. before they gave up and started talking about Dreamcast. Just to kind of put it into perspective, the Switch has been around since March.
March, yeah.
So a good 6 months, 7 months. It's sold 7.5 million units already. So in less than a year, it's approaching what the Saturn did in its lifetime. That's saying a lot. Here's some more numbers. For consoles of its day, the Nintendo 64 sold a little over 32 million, which ain't a lot. But, software, I feel like software sales were down a bit in this period.
Yeah.
It definitely went back up again
Nintendo
later.
64 had that whole controversy about cartridge versus CD at that time, too.
Yeah, the games were like $80.
Yeah.
It really jacked up the price. And nobody could really justify it. You could say the load times were faster. Maybe they were, because some PlayStation and Saturn load times weren't great. But to justify that cost, I don't know. And PlayStation sold over 100 million. So big time whooping. 10-1, dude.
Yeah.
It's crazy. And also, to be fair, the Saturn and the PlayStation, when they were, that first year they were out, it wasn't such a runaway, butt whipping. It wasn't until games like Final Fantasy VII came out where it, at least in Japan, it was holding, they were holding water. They were keeping up, at least in Japan. But once those games came out, then even in Japan, PlayStation was winning big time. So, that's just a bit of a history about Sega Saturn. It was a pretty impressive piece of hardware. 8-core processors. Everyone agreed that it was the most powerful, really impressive, most impressive system probably of its time. I also found it interesting too that that Tom Kalinske guy from Sega was really trying to get a deal going with the Silicon Graphics, which wanted to end up going to Project Dolphin for the N64, and that fell through. They were really trying to get them on board, and it might have been a different story if they could have gotten those better 3D, the polygons. That was the big thing about the Saturn. It couldn't push the polygons like the PlayStation and N64 could. And that ended up being what that generation of console was all about, the 3D games.
Yeah.
The Saturn was really impressive in 2D games. It was extremely fast. And in theory, it should have been able to handle those 3D games well, too. But it was notoriously difficult to program for, apparently. Let's see. I had another fact that I was going to talk about. Just a factoid. The Saturn was actually the system's code name.
No.
In a time where almost no system ends up being what it's called.
Right, yeah.
There's always the code name.
Ultra 64.
Yeah.
Dolphin.
So it was Saturn all along. I thought that was an interesting little factoid.
Of course, I guess Ultra 64 wasn't so much a code name as it just changed names.
They changed. And I'm glad that Nintendo 64 sounds cooler.
Yeah.
So with that, we'll go ahead and get into our top 10. We'll talk about our 10 favorite, not our top 10 ranked, but our 10 favorite games. And, Nick, I think since you were more of a Saturn fan than I was, why don't you get us started?
Well, okay, I'm going to cheat.
Big right off the bat.
Right off the bat. Well, because here's the thing. And most of my Saturn games were imported Japanese games, right? Mm-hmm. A lot of these games, some did come out to the States, a lot of them did not. Saturn, as you mentioned before, was good at 2D.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the late 90s. And so if you were a fighting game fan, Saturn was a powerhouse for fighting games. So this is where I want to cheat.
Okay.
Because as I was looking through my collection, I still have at least 20 fighting games on Saturn. And so instead of like, you know, coming up with like my top 5 fighting games, that's not what we're doing. You know, it's not about fighting games, it's about Saturn games. So I'm lumping fighting games as like my number 1.
Okay.
All right.
That's fine. So fighting games.
So fighting games. And interesting thing about the Saturn too, and these are the ones that did not come out in the States. Like, so here's like, I think this was the first one to utilize it maybe. King of Fighters 95, the Japanese release on the Saturn. Mm-hmm. So Saturn had a thing, it had like an expansion slot.
Hey, can we get a comparison of the U.S. Versus like the, Japan?
Yeah, and I'll even give you a comparison of the same game because, I'm Nick and I buy the same game twice. So, yeah, so here's like Street Fighter Alpha 2 American version, giant box.
Yeah, look at that thing.
Giant clamshell and normal jewel case for Japanese version, Street Fighter Zero.
Which is what you would see like in a PlayStation package.
Yeah. Well, and actually, PlayStation at first used these.
True, you're right.
The exact same things.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
And then they kind of did sort of the same style, but like with more of a plasticky kind of.
Yeah, but whereas like PlayStation started out this, they went to that.
Eventually they just went straight to this.
Right.
Yeah.
Saturn, I don't think ever went to this.
Saturn, American Saturn was always this.
Right. They were always that big old clamshell.
Yeah. So anyway, yeah. Japanese always had the better.
Thank you. I just wanted to get a side by side there.
But so the expansion slot. So they had like this cartridge.
Yeah, you talked about this in another episode, I remember.
Yeah, so it was like this 4 meg, I think. I think it's 4 megs cartridge slot that you would put that in the expansion slot, and then you'd pop in your disc.
Right.
And you'd get, it would give you that much more RAM in order to load like the animations and whatnot for, these 2D fighting games.
Yeah, it just feels like a regular old cartridge that you would top
If the
load
PlayStation got like these same games, they were just load times were like forever. There would be frames of animations cut.
So that was a big plus right there, because Sony couldn't do that.
Yeah, it was a huge plus. And so that just all the great fighting games were on the Saturn. So, I mean, I've got like any of those King of Fighters games. I've got, King of Fighters 95, 96.
Bought them every year. Like, I bought sports games. You bought like King of Fighter games.
There was like, Marvel superheroes.
Look at that art.
And then, Marvel superheroes versus Street Fighter.
Japan always had the coolest art, no doubt. For sure.
Night Warriors, or in Japan as it was called, Vampire Hunter. But it was the same game as Night Warriors.
Really fun series of games.
There's like the American X-Men versus Street Fighter.
I like that game. That's a fun game. I remember really liking the Sentinels in those games.
So this one didn't utilize that card, I guess, because they didn't ever do it in America.
Oh yeah, good point. So you didn't get that advantage.
Yeah, like the Virtua Fighter Kids. The late '90s. There were a few fighting games that they would have like the kind of the chibi kids cute version.
It was very cute.
Got like the little Street Fighter collection. That has like Super Street Fighter, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo.
Or is it just?
I think it's 2, because I think one disc is Super Street Fighter.
That's cool.
And Super Turbo. So yeah, even the discs are cool. Got like that Japanese art for Chun-Li.
Yeah, that's neat.
And the other disc is Street Fighter 02 Dash, which is. Actually, it doesn't even show it on there. It just says Street Fighter Collection.
Yeah, for you audio listeners, we're actually taking a look at the physical media.
But,
so check out the YouTube channel, guys.
That's like the... in America, it came out Street Fighter Alpha 2 Gold was Street Fighter 02 Dash.
Gotcha.
So it's like the Champions Edition of Street Fighter Alpha 2, basically.
Mm-hmm. And of course, you already showed off the 2 alpha games there.
Yeah, and I already showed the 2 alpha games. So yeah, I mean, there was, I had the Street Fighter series, the King of Fighters series.
Oh, don't forget to mention
the X-Men Marvel, series.
Don't forget to mention the differences in the controllers.
Oh yeah. The Japanese controllers were better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the American controllers, they're fat. They felt like hollow. Like I don't even know how to explain it. Like there was just like all this air. But the Japanese controllers were like very nice and sleek.
Now, did you import in a Japanese Saturn to play those games, or did you or was it region free?
I had an American version. I installed a mod chip on the American version I had. Later on, I did buy a Japanese Saturn.
Now, is that where you actually got your hands on the controller, the Japanese controller?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. So right now, the Saturn I have is a Japanese Saturn.
Okay.
Which, plays fine on American TV.
Now, does it have the same controller port? Like, could you plug in the Japanese controller into the... Okay.
Yes.
So you could technically import one of those controllers over...
I'm pretty sure I still do have an American Saturn controller.
You're right, man. They're pudgy and
yeah,
like you say, they're very hollow feeling.
Yeah, the Japanese.
It feels
far,
cheap.
Far better.
It feels cheap.
But yeah, so that's my number one. Basically, is just the fighting
games for the Saturn,
because it was just a fighting game fan's dream come true. Was the Sega Saturn?
Well, you're the guy that bought a 3DO essentially to get an arcade perfect port of a Street Fighter game, so that doesn't surprise me.
So so there's my number one.
Number one, okay, cool. Shall I go with my number one? I guess.
Yep.
I noticed you didn't mention. Well, you kind of did, but Virtua Fighter 2 is my number one.
Well, and I did play Virtua Fighter 2 a little bit, but I never as much as like the Capcom games. For the people that actually learned it, because I know it's a very deep game.
It's not a forgiving game.
It's not, and I never really took the time to learn it that well. I liked it, but I liked the Capcom fighting games better. We'll just put it that way.
And it's not that Street Fighter is a game that you can button mash and win, but Virtua Fighter really isn't one of those games.
Yeah, and I tried to, because I didn't take the time to learn it.
Yeah, like whereas Tekken, we have established you could very much button mash and get some cool looking combos.
Yeah.
Not to say that you could get very skilled at Tekken and school a button masher, but it at least felt like you could get some wins, luckily.
But it's very slow, but I really, really liked the look and just the animation and everything.
It's very fluid.
Virtua Fighter, though. But like I say, you look at it, though, and it is very slow. Like, if you jump, it just seems like you float, kind of.
Oh, yeah. The jumping is awful.
Yeah.
And maybe that's part of it, too. And, if... Nobody, for a game that's grounded in reality like Virtua Fighter seems to be, the floaty jumping mechanics is off.
But something about, you say Virtua Fighter 2, did you not?
Yes, Virtua Fighter 2.
Because I'm thinking about Virtua Fighter 1 right now as far as
That's okay, we can lump them together.
Really liking those polygon graphics. I don't know what it is about that style, I like it. Virtua Fighter 2 cleaned that up a little bit. And it doesn't, and it looks good, but it doesn't have the same character, I don't think, as those polygon blockiness.
Yeah, the characters themselves, other than Shun-Li or Shun-Di?
Shun-Di?
Yeah, the drunken monkey stuff.
Guy? Yeah, and he's from 2. He's not even in 1.
Yeah, he's in 2. He was one of the newer characters. Now, he's got a lot of personality just due to his mechanic, I guess, his fighting style.
I liked him.
He was very fun to play with.
That really got me interested. In fact, I think it's Virtua Fighter, for the most part, that kind of got me interested in watching, those kung fu flicks.
Is that right?
Jackie Chan and, Jet Li and a lot of that stuff. It's probably fighting games in general, but... the drunken style, because Virtua Fighter would have those real fighting styles, and I think that had a lot to do with it.
Could be, yeah. Yeah, I mean, you know, like, I couldn't even tell you all that much about the characters other than him. There was the ninja, whom
Kage.
Kage. I would have said Cage.
Yeah. And I would have too.
Yeah.
You know, back in the 90s.
But he was in both of them. He was kind of one of the staple characters. There's Akira.
Yeah.
Akira. He was kind of like the you know, the cover guy.
Yeah.
He was like your Ryu kind of character. The balanced one. There's Sarah and
Lao.
He was
like a cook.
Yeah. Did we say Leon? I think we did. I don't know. Leon, but spelled like lion.
And he had like the mantis style.
Yeah, the mantis was cool.
Yeah.
So, you know, it was a cool game. It's a very, very beloved game. And it's not like I Street Fighter 2D fighting all the way, dude. And, you know, it's just that fighting games were such a huge thing in the mid to late 90s that you could even give something like that a try. Like, I was so hungry, so thirsty for fighting games, I was willing to expand out. And, again, 3D graphics were all the rage. It only makes sense to try a game like that out. So, I got it. You know, I enjoyed it. It certainly was a great game. It was a very authentic port from the arcade.
Yeah.
As I've mentioned in the past several times, like, I was a big fan of Sega because they were obviously got dibs on the arcade ports. And it was all about the arcade ports for me. So, you know, if I could get like a really close port of that, even though I don't really remember playing that game in the arcades, I very clearly remember Virtual Fighter. Was there a Virtual Fighter 2 arcade?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Okay. Oh, yes.
Okay. I figured there had to have been, but
yeah.
Tekken dominated the arcade scene for so much around that time, it feels like.
Yeah.
But yeah, Virtual Fighter 2, that's my number one. I thought I would piggyback off your fighting games.
Well, and I think Tekken was out about the same time as Virtual Fighter 2, but really when Virtual Fighter 1 was out, I mean, it was kind of a class all its own.
Yeah.
There was nothing else like it.
It was you turned your head, it caught your eye, you know, and Sega was kind of big into that 3D polygon. Like, if there was a racing game that they were real big into, that like F1 style type game. So, you know, it only made sense. There weren't a whole lot of games I was interested in the Saturn, but that was one that I was like, I liked the first one. It came with my Saturn, and it got rave reviews. And it only made sense that I pick it up, and I liked it, and I gave it a fair chance, you know. And I've never been a big fan of the Tekken series, you know, to be honest.
Really?
Yeah, I really have never picked up any Tekken game and played it a bit. I think Tekken 2 was like the one that I probably played the most. But, you know, I was just never a big fan of Tekken. But at least I can say I called myself a fan of Virtual Fighter 2. I liked it. It was kind of cool. Yeah, Nick, so that takes us to number 2. What's your number 2?
Number 2, Guardian Heroes. That game, and I don't know if you remember it, but...
I don't remember it when it was out.
You know, I don't even remember how I heard of it, but it's a very interesting game because it's like a choose-your-own-adventure book kind of a thing. It's very... very cool, cartoony kind of animation. It's kind of like your side scroller hack and slash kind of a thing.
Yeah, to the layman looking at videos of it and screenshots, it looks like a simple Final Fight type game.
Yeah, I mean it's kind of like you know, like Double Dragon in a way, but it has moves that you can execute Street Fighter style almost.
Oh.
That, you know, you can do like these special moves, and you can take different paths throughout the game, and depending on the path you take, you know, changes the whole scenario. Like it, you know, you would get to like a totally different last level, final boss, ending. I'm not even sure how many endings this game has. It has multiple endings depending on choices you make within the game.
Now, did this game come out like late in its life cycle? Because
I don't remember when it came out really in the Saturn's life cycle.
It's a game that shows up at the top of every Saturn list of top games, and I can't explain why I don't know more about this game.
I wish I could remember like how it caught my attention, because I did get it at the time and thought, wow, this is really cool. Had no idea kind of the cult following that it has accumulated since
Over
then.
time.
Yeah, over time.
Well, it was released in an Xbox Live game, right?
It was
Years later.
Yeah.
And I missed it then too. Like, it wasn't even something that I grabbed at that time.
Yeah, I picked it up on Xbox Live because I was like, oh yeah, that game's really cool. And and I probably played it more on Xbox Live really than I did on the Saturn.
It's a really nice looking game. Even on the Saturn, it looked really nice.
Yeah, I love those cartoony graphics.
It has
great.
Capcom style looking graphics. Like, is it made by Capcom?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
I'm not sure who made it.
But if you told me that it was, I would totally believe it.
It looks like
it's a very quality looking game. And for a system that was so, deprived of quality titles, especially like exclusive to Saturn quality titles, I just can't believe I missed it. Because I like hack and slash games.
If memory serves, the American box art does not do it justice. I think the Japanese artwork is far better. And I had the American version. I don't have it anymore. It's one of those that like I sold at the time.
The Great Purge.
Yeah, the Great Purge. Because I did have the American version, and now all I have is.
I wonder if that's a backwards
Xbox
compatible
360.
title for Xbox One. Because some of those Xbox Live games I think are backwards compatible. So I wonder if it is. I would love to.
If I can like download that and play it on Xbox One, I will. We'll have to look at that.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I bought it on 360.
Now, how many players was it, multiplayer-wise? Like,
at least 2. I can't remember whether it used the 4-player adapter or not, because it did have at least 4 characters you could choose from.
Okay.
I just don't remember if it supported 4 simultaneously.
So for the Xbox 360, then it was 4 players, I guess?
I want to say it did support 4 players, but I can't remember.
Cool.
Because I never really had opportunity to play with all the players if we did. It was at the Arcade Expo one year. It was on a Saturn kiosk, and I remember Martin and I saw it because Martin had fond memories of it also.
Is that right?
And he and I were playing it. Well, and those kiosks only supported 2 players, so I don't know. I'll have to look it up.
So the Saturn display they had for it was what was on it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool. Well, when we go this year,
see
maybe they'll have one, and I'll get a chance to try it out.
Yeah,
because they tend to have the same games on it every year.
Yeah, and if not like on that kiosk, they might have it like in the console room where they have like a bunch of different old consoles.
I also might have to look for like an emulator that plays Saturn titles.
Yeah.
Because I would think that it's not one of the more popular emulated things you see out there, but I imagine there's got to be an emulator for Saturn that plays pretty well.
Yeah, surely there is.
By now.
It's not really something I've ever really looked up, but surely there is.
If GameCube can play, then surely it's Saturn. Anyways. Yeah, so I'm sorry. I wish I could contribute more to the conversation as far as the Guardian Heroes goes. Although I can confirm that I know that it's really popular. As you say, a cult title in hindsight. Probably didn't sell really well, as most cult things. It didn't get a sequel, I guess.
Yeah. But it's a great little title.
But in all fairness, if it came out later in its life cycle, which I'm assuming it probably did, I'm willing to bet that I already had an N64 and PlayStation and was devoting all of my attention to that.
Yeah.
And, unless I was in a store, because I know sometimes you would pop into shops and talk to the people that work there, and they'd turn you on to a game, like you said for Tenchu.
Yeah.
So maybe somebody maybe turned you on to it. I don't know.
The only thing I can think of is just seeing pictures in a magazine, like Game Fan or something.
Right.
because you know how GameFan had that nice,
Oh yeah,
those nice screenshots.
I remember in the last episode talking about GameFan.
So,
those beautiful glossy screenshots.
That's the only thing I can really think of is seeing those nice glossy screenshots and thinking that game looks pretty.
I could see how that game would sell you from those screenshots, because it was a very colorful, nice looking game. All right, I guess we'll move on to my number 2.
Okay.
And then for my number 2, I'm gonna go with probably the game I played the most on the Saturn, to be honest, is Daytona USA.
Daytona.
Again, an arcade port, and not a great arcade port, mind you.
Yeah, because I'll have to be honest, I love Daytona USA, but I played it more in the arcade than on the Saturn.
Yeah, we both played the arcade quite a bit. It was one of those arcades that was like in the lobby of Walmart.
Yeah. So,
We'd go out, we'd take turns on our breaks. We'd run out there like on our 15-minute and say like, oh, well, I came in 9th or whatever. We really didn't have a whole lot of time to play, but you could play Daytona. So I have fond memories of the Daytona arcade game, and I'll play it anytime I see it, like anywhere, like
It's got that catchy music.
Yep, it was a fun game. So only naturally when it came out for the Saturn, I picked it up, and I was plenty happy with it. I mean, I could tell that it wasn't the greatest port. And later on down the road, they came out with like a championship kind of edition that was better, but still not arcade perfect.
Yeah.
And in fact, it wasn't until like way later that on the 360, Xbox 360,
That's what I was gonna say. Is that's another one that came out on 360.
Yeah, now that was the actual true 60 frames per second, like perfect arcade port.
Yeah.
The Hornet was finally in all of its glory. Yeah.
Speaking of the Hornet,
Okay. Go ahead.
did you know? And going back to the fighting games. So on the Saturn, there was a fighting game called Fighters Mega Mix.
I'm familiar with the title, yeah.
And so basically, this was like the Sega All Stars fighting game.
I remember it had the Fighting Viper characters
so there
in
was
it.
like the Virtua Fighter, the Fighting Viper characters. There were characters there was a Sonic the Hedgehog fighting game that you may or may not be familiar with.
Don't know about that one either.
There were characters from it.
I can't imagine how that even controlled.
Just all different like Sega characters were in there. Anyway, a secret character was the Hornet, the car.
Yeah, I'm gonna go along with this and pretend like we weren't talking about this earlier and I was cracking up. But yes, please go on.
The car from Daytona USA. It's like, and it's literally like the car is like standing up on end.
Yeah.
And you know how like Rayman, where his limbs, he's got like invisible limbs, right?
Yeah, they're just sort of floating. They're not attached to his body.
Yeah, you just see like feet and hands. Well, those are the tires on the car. So the tires are like punching, and it's just, so you just see like a floating tire just kind of like punch out, right? Because then that car is like standing up on it.
After I was flabbergasted when you told me that it existed, I was laughing so hard. Then you showed me the picture, and it sure enough was the Hornet, just sort of like straight up and down, a car with no like face or anything. It was just the car, and then there was this, hovering wheels for his fists. It's about the laziest looking thing.
But that's not even the laziest one.
Tell me more, Nick.
The laziest one, there's this bear, and I'm not sure where this bear comes from. I think it comes from like the background of like one of the like a Fighting Viper game or something.
They were reaching pretty hard for characters.
But this thing doesn't even like have any animation.
But you got to use your phone as a prop. So you're like,
because it's like this bear, and he just, and his attacks are like.
No animation whatsoever.
Yeah, no animation. He's just like boop 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 boop.
It was like a float, like a parade float, stiff, but just like you said, just sort of being like thrashing out as a punch.
I don't remember if they got two characters out of it or if it was just like the second player color or something, because they turned the bear into a panda also. Because I know that I've seen pictures. There's like the old palette swap. There's like there's a bear and there's a panda, and he doesn't even move. He's just like. Psh, psh.
Pretty crummy, man. That was Fighter Mega Mix, right?
Yeah.
They got a lot of mileage out of that Virtual Fighter.
It was a cool game though, and I mean, you laugh at those little extras because they're just.
It's so charming.
Yeah, they're just
in a bad movie a bad movie's good kind of way.
They're hidden characters thrown in for extra. You know, it's not like paid DLC.
Yeah, yeah. You didn't pay for these characters. They just tossed them in as a goof.
Yeah.
So if you think of it in that, well, you know, it's kind of like with Tekken. They had the animals or whatever.
Now, since we're talking about crazy things, if I am not mistaken, you know, the AM2 logo is like a palm tree.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken, that palm tree is a hidden character.
The palm tree. And was it also just like stiff?
I don't remember. Yeah, that one I'll have to look up. But yeah, if I'm not mistaken, the AM2 palm tree is a hidden character.
It's like you're joking. You know, like when you make a joke and you start like, you know, exaggerating your jokes. It almost sounds like an exaggerated joke from the car.
Yeah,
like,
it's just like,
oh, and what if the logo from AM2 was a fighder, but maybe he wasn't.
Yeah, you get like a few guys sitting around a round table. You know, they got beers and whatever. Hey, what if we did this?
That'd be great.
Yeah, throw it in.
Yeah. But yeah, you know, Sega's had a sense of humor, I guess. Yeah. Or there wasn't a lot of time to pump that game out. I don't know.
It was a fun little game, yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, Daytona USA. We were talking about the Hornet. It was a fun game. I liked it quite a bit, and if I'm not mistaken, you know, like I don't keep a lot of games. After all, I'll play and get my fill, and I'll turn around and sell it,
right?
And pay, you know, use it to pay for whatever's out new. Mm-hmm. But I think I kept Daytona. Like I probably got that, you know, like your US case somewhere in the basement. I just didn't look for it.
Yeah.
But, you know, anyways, that's my number 2, Daytona USA.
Cool.
What's your number 3?
Number 3, Saturn Bomberman.
Okay.
Which, in my opinion...
So not Bomberman for Saturn, it's called...
The name is Saturn Bomberman.
Saturn Bomberman.
Yeah.
Okay.
In my opinion, that's the best Bomberman game. And probably the main reason for that... if I'm not mistaken, I'm saying that a lot. I think it utilized 2 of the 4-player adapters and lets you play 8 players. Bomberman.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice.
Because, like, you know, Bomberman, like on Super Nintendo, you know, you could use 4 players on it, but this one I think allowed 8 players, if I'm not mistaken.
A lot of people consider that Bomberman 93 or 94 for TurboGrafx is like the best, but I've seen that the Saturn Bomberman. It's a really nice looking game. It's for sure, you know, better looking.
Very well may be, except I didn't play that one.
Yeah.
I didn't have TurboGrafx, so...
Right. So you're not saying, like, as an expert of all Bomberman games...
Exactly.
In your opinion...
Bombermans that I'm familiar with.
Yeah, right. The Bombermans that I've played. You didn't have a TurboGrafx.
Which Bombermans I'm familiar with is Super Bomberman on Super Nintendo, Super Bomberman 2 on Super Nintendo, mm-hmm. Saturn Bomberman on Sega Saturn, and Bomberman 64 on Nintendo 64.
Don't forget the Switch Bomberman. You played that one, haven't you?
Oh yeah, well only
over you I guess Logan. my copy. Yeah, okay.
So yeah, the Switch Bomberman is very good.
It's not bad. Yeah, it got better. They fixed some stuff and some patches.
So you know, I'm no huge Bomberman expert, but
you start to see the decline in our favorites. You know, it's like all the fighting games. Yeah. Then. You know,
then you start digging.
Yeah, Guardian Heroes,
Bomberman
a cult
was
favorite.
Good though.
Yeah, you know, I didn't have it, but I remember it.
I did have it. I didn't bring it, but I do have it. I do still have that one.
Cool. Imagine if they had an online component for Saturn at the time. I mean, I don't think it did. I think Dreamcast was like the first.
Did they not have a dial-up modem kind of a thing?
I don't think so, which is odd because the Sega Genesis had that X-band. You would assume that they did, but I don't remember it.
I don't remember.
They might have hung that up, like, oh, that was a little too before. We're not ready for online yet. The X-band was kind of a neat little, you know, novelty. But it obviously, like, Dreamcast came out and it had the built-in modem.
It had a built-in
and it was kind of a big... And it worked. It worked pretty well.
With a dial-up or a broadband that you could pop it out and pop in a broadband one.
Yeah, I remember finally playing some online games with the Dreamcast and it worked fine.
I remember trying to do the dial-up and, you know, it never go.
Can you imagine how that went? Cool. So, Saturn Bomberman. What else can you say? You people have played a Bomberman game. It hasn't changed much.
It's
over the
Bomberman.
years.
Yeah,
they did venture into
when they
3D.
did the Bomberman 64, it changed a little bit at that point. But 2D.
But then they got back on track.
2D Bomberman is pretty much 2D Bomberman. If you see it, you know what we're talking about.
Then thank God the 3D phase ended, and then people realized, hey, people still like 2D games.
It doesn't have to be 3D.
Yeah. It can be a really polished 2D game.
And they even realized it can be 3D generated graphics, but it can be played 2D.
That was the sweet spot right there. Okay, all right, so we'll move on to my number 3. And to be fair, this is not a game that I owned, but I played it a lot in stores, and I think I had a demo of it. But
I will allow that.
Okay, thank you. After your 3DO demo. Thank you, Judge. Panzer Dragoon. Well, and there were like a couple. There was like Panzer Dragoon Zui or something.
I remember playing Panzer Dragoon at the demo at Toys R Us.
Yeah. Well, and that's where I saw it originally. And it was really, really impressive. It was a Sega game. It wasn't an arcade, but it's a game that I remember reading, not as an official factoid, but factoid. Saturn was in trouble. They realized they were in trouble. They started pulling resources away from their arcade teams, and developed Panzer Dragoon to try and help bring some quality in arcade-like games to the Saturn. So that was developed by arcade, developers. So it had that first class look to it, and it played very much like a Star Fox game, kind of game.
Yeah.
It was on rails, and I've never been a huge fan of games that are on rails, but it certainly didn't lack, like a sense of space, like that. You could go all over the place, and you were riding a dragon, and if you found that sort of aesthetic interesting, which I kind of did, it actually enjoyed it more than a Star Fox game. I like Star Fox, and I appreciate where its place in the annals of Nintendo, and the lore of the Fox McCloud characters. A lot of people really dig it, but it was that Panzer Dragoon game I found it more appealing to play.
Yeah, and I think that has a lot to do with it, is like whatever coat of paint that it may happen to have on it. Because like for me, I got into Star Fox more. Mm-hmm. That I played the demo of Panzer Dragoon at Toys R Us, and I didn't really get into it, and it just wasn't really, the aesthetics wasn't really something I was into. Maybe if it had a different coat of paint of something that I was into, maybe it would be a totally different story.
Yeah, if this were more like Star Wars and not Lord of the Rings, maybe I would have been into this.
Yeah.
And I like Star Wars too, but it looked really cool. It was a game that, and I'm guilty of letting the Saturn die. I mean, like I said at the top of the show, not even 10 million units sold. I was one of those units. I should have been jumping all over every one of these games. Yeah. But I didn't. But Panzer Dragoon was a really impressive game. Obviously, it's near the top of all these like lists you see online, of all-time favorite Saturn games. And it was very polished. The sound was amazing. It had all those dramatic build-ups, and the boss fights were memorable. And to me, like, to make a good one of those types of Rails games, it has to have like interesting bosses. And to me, it always felt like I was really into those 16-bit style like shooter games, like top to up, like I think I was like blazing lasers for the TurboGrafx, like I mentioned. Not this left or right, like Gradius type games, but the like where your ship's at the bottom and you're going up.
Right.
It felt like that, even though it was in 3D. Like the bosses felt very dramatic, like the bosses in those 16-bit shooter style games, which were really popular in the early 90s. So it reminded me of those types of games, whereas the Star Fox never reminded me of a game like that. Mm-hmm. It was very much the cuteness of the characters and doing the barrel rolls.
Do a barrel roll!
Yeah. And I'm not putting it down, to raise my game. I think Star Fox was neat, and I appreciate all of its technical achievements, and I love Nintendo aesthetic. obviously, and he loved Nintendo. But, you know, I'm going to give props to Panzer Dragoon Saga. I think it was a really cool game, and I'm going to throw it on my list, even though I didn't own it. I'm sorry, Sega.
That's okay.
Yeah. What's your number 4, Nick?
All right, so number 4 for me, it's one now, and I did own it, so I'm one up on you there. But it's almost like I feel kind of an obligation to this one, rather than it's actually one of my favorites, because I really didn't even get into it. I bought it really because of the hype that they were really playing this up, and I might as well just say it.
Get it out there.
Nights into Dreams. All right. So now, but the big thing with this is it also came with a brand new controller. There was the analog controller, very big deal back then. It was like the first like console analog controller, I think. And
that was a fantastic controller.
Ever since then, it's like every controller had analog on it after that. And
so major props to Knights for giving you. And it came with the game.
It came with the game.
I remember that box was kind of a big box.
Yeah, and I did like that controller. I used it even without the analog, using the analog.
It was kind of nubby.
It had like little grips on it, and you know I used it for playing the fighting games with the D-pad.
Oh, I bet.
Anyway,
so let's talk about Knights. It was like you said, it was hyped, but it was really a rails shooting.
It was.
It wasn't even shooting.
That was the big thing for me, because everybody, like, the whole big thing about it was how revolutionary it was and gave you this fantastic feeling of flight. And yeah, it was smooth because of the analog, and you can, you know, do loop-to-loops and whatnot. But it was ultimately, it was on rails.
Yeah.
And it wasn't like, in my opinion, this feeling of flight like you can achieve in games now, that you can, you know, you got the Z plane, and you can you can fly anywhere. You were on rails, and you could just kind of fly like on this one XY
and the point was
plane.
to go through like rings, right?
Yeah. And
I didn't have this game either. I was not fooled by the hype.
Yeah,
it was a very colorful, and
I
it was a
gave
Sega
it a try.
game.
I liked the look of it, the graphics, you know, very
looked
colorful.
Pretty. Yeah,
it looked good.
Yeah, it did.
But yeah, I just didn't get into it. And
I wonder if like maybe getting impressions from you, like not being really enthralled with it, because the reviewers, as we were flipping through,
everybody fell in love with it,
yeah.
and I just didn't get it.
And again, it's one of those games that are way at the top of the list of top, you know, Saturn games. And I wonder, like, I have a suspicion that they'd put it there, like, you're sort of putting it on yours.
But I do feel like it deserves some props, because it did start like a revolution, you know, of things to come.
We tend to give, like, for firsts, you know, innovations and things. Like, we'll give a game, like, credit for that.
And so it was definitely there, but anyway.
And it had an interesting little gimmick too
about it.
The Christmas.
Yeah, there was that free giveaway, the Christmas nights, and I don't remember where I got it. I don't remember if it was like in a magazine, or if it was just like a disc that you could pick up like at Target, that, you know, how sometimes they'll just have like little free giveaways.
I don't think it was sold either. Like, I'm with you. Like, I feel like
it was
something...
free. It was definitely free.
Yeah. But it couldn't have been the whole game.
In fact, I think it was in just a cardboard sleeve. It was just a disc in a cardboard sleeve, and I'm pretty sure it's printed on it, like not for resale or something. Right. Or is it even a cardboard sleeve? I think it might be a little jewel case like this, maybe. I'm pretty sure I still have it. I'll look for it.
Okay. That'd be neat.
So I'll look for Christmas Nights.
Okay.
But yeah, I don't have much more to say.
What was the main character's name? Do you remember?
I don't know. Nights.
No, okay. Nighty.
Yeah, it was like a gesture.
It was like a little gesture. I remember there was this game called Pandemonium, where you ran.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I remember that.
It reminded me of that a little bit, and I remember trying that game out and being instantly turned off. At this time, I was just like, I wanted to play a game where you could go back and explore, and like I don't like being forced forward.
Yeah.
That's just not like you see a lot of these like mobile games, and to me like Nights into Dreams feels like a game that would be on a mobile like iPhone kind of thing. Like you see those like endless runner type deals, like a Mario Run. It's like it'd be fine for that, but this is a full-fledged game.
And I don't even get why. You know how it's always written out where like every letter is capitalized except for the I. The I is in lowercase. I don't understand why that is.
I don't know.
But that's like the proper way to write it, and I don't even know why.
Well, thanks for letting me know when I write it on the graphic.
Yeah, so write it correctly.
All capitals except the I.
Yeah, Nights. That's like for whatever reason. And, I wish it was explained somewhere.
All right, I guess it's my turn to go. Number 4 is really like a really good game. It's a popular game too. Sega Rally Championship.
Yeah.
Again, it was like one of those games. Like it wasn't an arcade, I don't think, but it was like those. Like AM2 was a real popular board.
Was it not an arcade game?
I don't remember if it was. I don't recall ever seeing it. It felt like an arcade. Like you could tell me that it was a port of an arcade, but it was a really, really fun game. And I have fond memories of playing that game. In my Babbage's days, you remember Mike and Dave?
Yeah.
I remember them like, they would set up a Saturn in the back of the store and we'd have like tournaments, like who could do. Yeah, I have fond memories of that game.
That's cool.
It's a really good looking game. It controlled really, really well. And being a rally game, it was kind of a new novelty. Like you see a lot of rally games, and they're popular in Europe, but it was stock car like Daytona USA, which was very like, like you're on a road, concrete. But when you're playing a rally game, you're like sliding and you're going up and down hills and through forests, and it's a kind of game you'd see a lot nowadays and not think about it. But I feel like that Sega Rally Championship game was like the first kind of rally game of its kind on a console that like it looked and played really, really well. And I was watching video of it, when I was doing my list, and it still looked pretty good. So at that time, it had to be considered the best racing game you could get for any system. And if you think about it too, like its competition was, over on N64, you had games like Cruise in USA, or even like San Francisco Rush. Mm. So they were real arcadey games. Like Sega Rally felt more like Gran Turismo.
And I like those better, I think, than kind of like little San Francisco Rush kind of arcadey games. I didn't really get into those.
They're fun for a minute or two, but you get a lot more replay out of like the Gran Turismo or Sega Rally. I have a factoid. Yeah, there were only 2 games to sell over 1 million copies from Sega
for Saturn.
Yeah. One was Virtua Fighter 2.
Yeah.
But again, you get that kind of skewed number where it was a pack-in at some point, so they count that as a sale. And
but 2 was the pack-in, not 1?
Well, 1 was the pack-in at launch. At a certain point, Saturn came packed in with Virtua Fighter 2 and some other games. When they reduced the price and they were just trying to get rid of what they had.
I don't know why.
You just got gypped, dude.
I got gypped.
I remember that pack because it was like, there were only a handful of really quality games to Saturn. I remember they packed in like 3 of those games. So they were just desperately trying to sell Saturns. But the Sega Rally Championship was the other. And it actually sold over 1 million. So in truthfulness, that is the game that probably sold the most. If you think about buying a game off the shelf, like that was the top-selling Saturn game, really.
That's interesting.
So a lot of people really enjoy that game, have fond memories of that game, myself included. I really like that game. I wish I'd kept it. Again, I just didn't keep many games. I think I only held on to Daytona because I had such fond memories of playing it in the arcades and stuff. If Sega Rally Championship had been an arcade game that I'd played a lot, I'd probably hung on to it. Because it was a really good game. But that's my number 4, Nick. I guess it's shout-out time.
Oh, shout-out? Do I have any shout-outs? I don't know if I have any shout-outs.
Well,
I guess you do, though.
Well, let's shout out Resident Evil just to get it out of the way.
Oh man, poor Resident Evil.
Yeah, we're just gonna mention Resident Evil. We've already bagged
Awesome
on
on the PlayStation, not so much on the Saturn.
it. Yeah.
So how's it a shout out?
What's that?
How's it?
I don't know, man. It's just we're mentioning it. Dishonorable mention, I guess.
Yeah, because it was not as good.
Stall was a game that was going to be on my list at first.
Which, yeah, in that one, I don't remember it all. But then I saw a picture of it, and I was like, oh, yeah, I do kind of remember that. But I don't think I played it, though.
It was a 2D platforming game. Really big sprites. Colorful game. It to me, it looked like... Well, you'd mentioned it. It looked kind of like a Rayman game.
Yeah.
Big, colorful graphics. So, and I'd probably beat it. It was one of the last gasp games I remember getting for it. It was one of those, like you said, like you probably saw it in a Game Fan. Big, pretty screenshots. And you're like, oh, I should get that game. That looks really cool. Bug, I guess, ought to get shouted out.
Bug.
Yeah, and there was actually a Bug sequel I didn't even know about. Bug 2, like TOO.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
It was kind of like one of those like 3D sort of kind of games.
I mean, I never played it, but I remember seeing the logo Bug 2.
That's okay, Nick. I know you didn't buy it.
I don't
Did you buy Bug?
No, I don't even think I've played Bug.
I bought Bug. I had it. It sucked. Clockwork Knight was a game that
I've never played it either.
It was kind of neat. I think Martin had even shouted that we were talking about games. Or maybe not. Maybe it was like something we talked about.
I was too busy playing Japanese fighting games.
Yeah, you were. But it was 2D with 3D rendered type graphics, and it wasn't bad. Duke Nukem 3D. I remember playing that for a bit. Mm-hmm. As I might have mentioned in previous games, if you worked, or not games, but episodes, if you worked at Babbage's, you were able to take home games and play them.
Earthworm Jim.
Earthworm Jim?
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, that's I rented that.
And there was a port of Earthworm Jim on the Saturn, apparently, like Earthworm Jim 2.
I think there was 2. Because at first I was thinking of the special edition, which was on
Sega CD.
Yeah. But yeah, 2 I believe was on Saturn. Yes.
I never played it, but I remember seeing it when I was looking at games that I could talk about. But Duke Nukem 3D was really fun. It was a third-person shooter, but you had the D-pad. So it's really hard to think about how it was to play with a third-person shooter with a D-pad. At least GoldenEye even had one analog, but but it worked.
Yeah,
and Duke Nukem was funny.
This was before Knights released the analog.
Yeah, but I remember PC gaming when I didn't really have a good enough computer to play a Duke Nukem. Duke Nukem and Doom and all those games were coming out, and I think there was even a Quake version that came out for Saturn. Yeah. It was supposed to be pretty good. I didn't have it. But yeah, Duke Nukem 3D is a shout out. And also this game called D.
I remember D.
Yeah, it was like a horror, action kind of
After Resident Evil, it seems like horror games that were starting to become popular. And,
yeah, it was very psychological.
There D and that one other one comes to mind that kind of popped up at that time.
I can't say I remember which one you might be thinking of, but
Clock Tower or something like that. Maybe I don't remember.
Yeah, it was like those 16-bit games, like the graphic. It reminded me of the Out of This World kind of style graphics, know. But it was fun. It was kind of neat. But those are my shout outs. Why don't you go ahead and reveal your number 5?
Okay, yeah. So my number 5. It's kind of like how Knights was. It's not so much. I just feel like it deserves some sort of a shout out, I guess. In a way.
It would be a shout out in most other lists, but it named the list.
Because I didn't actually own it, but since my number 1 was 20 games. So,
the biggest cheat ever, and we've had some big cheats in our 10 favorites. But when you spell out 20 games, my number 1 is the entire genre of fighting games. But anyways, what is it?
Well, I feel like we just need to give some kind of props that if I'm not mistaken, Tomb Raider came out on the Saturn a little bit before the PlayStation.
I found a couple of different places that back that up. Yeah, like by maybe a month, it was like a timed exclusive.
Now, but
I guess.
to be fair to Tomb Raider, I own it on the PlayStation, so yeah.
Yeah.
I don't even know if I played it on the Saturn. I remember like you either rented it one day or something.
I probably brought it home from work.
And I remember like being at your house and seeing it on the Saturn. I think before I had the PlayStation version.
Yeah.
And so kind of got a taste of it at that point. I mean, I say I don't remember playing it, but surely when I was at your house, I played it for at least 5 minutes.
At least. And it had to be kind of impressive at the time. I mean.
Yeah, and it's one of those that I kind of followed in the magazines that kind of got my interest on it, and when I did get it for the PlayStation.
Yeah.
But
I think you had mentioned that too, or you saw like a single screenshot of like a bear or something like that.
Yeah, in like Game Fan.
Caught your eye.
Yeah, and so it is one of those that I feel like deserves some sort of prop because it was the first of something big.
A gigantic franchise got its start on the Saturn.
They've made movies now. I mean, Tomb Raider's a big name, so
it's worth mentioning that.
I think it got its start on the Saturn, so there it is.
I think it's safe to say that everybody thinks of Tomb Raider as a PlayStation game. Mm-hmm. Everybody does. And it might as well be a factoid to mention that it was a first came out for Saturn. It really,
and
not a lot of people would say that.
I would have totally forgot.
Yeah,
to be honest.
So what can you say about Tomb Raider? It was in my 5 favorites as a PlayStation game. And I had a Saturn well before a PlayStation, so I must have gone back and picked it up.
We have these top 10s, and if we say Tomb Raider in the top 10 of PlayStation, Tomb Raider in the top 10 of Saturn,
they were both kind of like,
love Tomb Raider.
Yeah. You would think that we love Tomb Raider, but
it's just like
acknowledgement
out of respect more than anything.
And they were fun games for the time. They were fun games. I mean, it had to have been a popular game if it's going to spawn all those sequels.
Yeah.
I don't want to shit on it. It was fun.
Yeah.
but it feels weird to make it like in your favorites.
Yeah. I think, somebody like listening in, it might get the wrong impression.
Yeah, they
that
might.
We like it more than we actually do.
I can guarantee you if I put together a top 50 favorite games of all time, it wouldn't even sniff it.
Yeah.
It would be a whole lot of like Nintendo games and
it's
a bunch of other systems that we haven't done lists for. But just because it's in our top 10 like all-time favorite,
it's that
such and such
it's
play.
that feeling of obligation to give it props.
Lara Croft, we consider this probably the last time we give you your props. We're not gonna give you any more props beyond this point.
Because quite honestly, I haven't really been following the series. Like when it had that reboot a few years ago, it looked interesting.
I've gotten them all.
I was interested in it.
They're good.
But yeah, I didn't even get it until much later. And even then, like I was trying it out and I just couldn't get into it.
They're really fun games. There's no doubt they're really quality games. They're like Uncharted games.
I don't think it was like I couldn't get into it because I wasn't so much interested. It's just that I was just doing other things.
Yeah. We have so many choices nowadays. If you don't get into a game the day you bring it home and play it and stick with it, it's more than likely going to get passed over by the flavor of the month, flavor of the day. We're really spoiled as gamers nowadays. Yeah. No doubt about it. But yeah, I'm sure like years down the road, if we keep doing this and we end up doing like a PlayStation 4 all-time 5, even though that's a great game, it ain't going to be in my top 5. I promise you, it won't be. There's just too many other good games. All right, well, fair enough. Move on to my number 5, and we'll wrap this show up.
Number 5.
Virtual Cop.
Yeah, I remember Virtual Cop.
Yeah, the point-and-shoot games. It wasn't so much that I loved Virtual Cop, was that I loved Time Crisis.
Time Crisis is what pops in my mind.
Yeah, Time Crisis was such a fun game at the arcades.
It's like the granddaddy to... I mean, Virtual Cop did come out first, right?
Don't know.
Because
I couldn't answer.
I want to say it's like the granddaddy to Time Crisis.
I only really remember playing Time Crisis in the arcades. Time Crisis.
I started to mix the two names. I almost said Time Cop.
Yeah, right? Jean-Claude Van Damme.
Virtual Crisis.
Oh, they missed an opportunity to make a light gun game there, didn't they? Starring old Jean-Claude Van Damme. But Time Crisis got me interested in Virtual Cop. Whether one came out before the other, I don't know.
And let's be honest, Time Crisis we loved because of the
recoiling gun.
Like the kickback on the gun.
Well, it was neat because you take cover, you press down on the pedal, and then when you press down on the pedal, you would, go to shoot, you'd aim, plat, 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 and then to reload, you'd have to let off the pedal, and then you'd reload and come back, pat, 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 pat. So, I'm really giving, my number 5 is Time Crisis, but I'm going to put Virtual Cop in there because it's like it. And a lot of, it's like Virtual Cop 2, I see a lot on the list, but I never played Virtual Cop 2, so it goes to Virtual Cop. But it had those, cheesy Day-Glo colored guns, I think they were pink and blue, and they had no recoil love, but you did point and shoot, and the targets would pop up, and it was fun.
Was the Saturn's guns the blue and the pink, or was that the arcade?
I think it was the Saturns. Because it came in those boxes.
I can't even remember how the Saturn's light guns were.
Speaking of Time Crisis, did you ever play Time Crisis for PlayStation?
Oh, I owned it on PlayStation, and it had it had the special gun that it plugged into the video RCA jack to make it more accurate.
But do you remember how you reloaded?
There was a button. Was it letting go of that button?
Maybe, but you could also step on your PlayStation controller.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
I remember thinking that was so funny. On one hand, I was very happy that mechanic made it to the home version, but on the other hand, I'm like, I'm stepping on my PlayStation controller.
I never did that.
I did.
I know, I never did it.
Yeah. It didn't recoil though, did it?
No, it did not.
No, and that was most of the fun.
No, it did not. And I remember I tried to mod my gun. I bought a little laser pointer, and I tried to hot glue it to the top to have a little laser pointer. Yeah.
That's awesome. Did it work okay?
It didn't work out as good as I hoped.
Okay. That would have been badass.
Yeah, it would have been.
But the things we do to try and get that home, port experience. I feel bad even talking so glowingly about another game, a PlayStation game at that, for my number 5 of the Saturn.
My number 5 is Virtual Cop.
Yeah. But do you remember this other better game? This other better game was it was awesome. So, I'm sort of kind of cheating.
Even as you're talking about Virtual Cop being your number 1, I'm thinking, I played me a lot of Time Crisis.
Oh boy, Time Crisis, what a game. Should have been in my PlayStation 5, but I remember being not so impressed with the...
and how many sequels did Time Crisis have though?
They're still out, man. You go to in Dave and Buster, now they have machine guns, dude.
Well, because that's what I was gonna say, because I know it gets up there I don't know, 4 or 5.
There's at least 4, but I think they have special editions.
The first one's all I ever played, really.
Yeah, I played them all. I'm pretty sure I played them all. But if you want to play an arcade, now you got to go to a Main Event or a Dave & Buster's or a Malibu Jack's or whatever you have in your town. They're still around. They still apparently make them.
Yeah, Time Crisis, it's got that gimmick to keep it around.
It does.
Arcade games have to have a gimmick now.
Oh yeah, and they do. Well, even back in the day, the gimmick was key. You had so many arcades in the arcade, you'd have to have something a little special to get you, whether it be you sit in a cockpit or it's, Laserdisc or whatever, the gimmicks are always going to catch your eye. So, yeah, my number 5 for Saturn is
Time Crisis.
Remember how great Time Crisis was. No, for real, Virtual Cop. It was fun. it was kind of cool. And I think like I remember like a limo, like the bosses, and like you shoot up the car and like pieces would go flying and stuff.
I remember seeing pictures of it in advertisements.
There you go. That's Nick's contribution. Anyway, well, that's been our Sega Saturn show. Our 10 favorite Sega Saturn games and some thoughts on some other games.
And our favorite like 20 fighting games on Saturn.
So do we call this our favorite 30 games? No, we're just going to stick to 10 and cheat because that's what we do here at BitGeek. Oh, well, thanks for watching our show. If you were a fan of the Sega Saturn, we probably mentioned all your favorite games, I'm sure. If not, let us know in the comments down below. If you don't mind liking the video, if you liked it, press the like, subscribe if you don't mind, so that when new episodes come out, each and every Thursday, you'll be notified. And, also, podcast listeners, audio only, you find us on iTunes and wherever podcast service you subscribe to. Again, subscribe there, and we'll let you know automatically when a new show comes out. Check out the Facebook page, the BitGeeks, where you'll never know what kind of stuff we're going to post on there.
Yeah, maybe we'll put a picture, maybe not.
Maybe we'll put something, maybe not. Maybe we'll put a picture that references a show from 3 episodes ago.
Yeah, because there's that thing.
Yeah, well, sometimes we find cool things and we'll throw it up on the Facebook page. Yeah. Look, we're not saying that the Facebook page is the greatest, but we try to put stuff there for those audio listeners. But if you're not listening to if you're not watching us on YouTube, what's wrong with you? Just watch us on YouTube. It's so much more fun. But anyways, I'm done. I've been Ron Avis.
And I'm Nick Wright.
And thanks for watching the show. We'll see you next week.
See ya.